Updates with Mr. Warford. Updates with Mr. Warford. Updates with Mr. Warford. Updates with Mr. Warford.
What's up? Welcome to Updates with Mr. Warford. This is from my world history classes, all right? We're rounding out World War I, believe it or not. So we're going to jump right in. Why did the United States enter World War I? So basically, when World War I popped off in 1914 in Europe, Woodrow Wilson, the president at the time, wanted the U.S. to be neutral. But at the same time, they were sending things over to Great Britain because they were a trading partner. So they were buying and selling goods back and forth with Britain while this war was going on. Now, to prevent supplies and, other like weapons, things that they were buying from entering Great Britain, Germany was sinking vessels off the coast of Great Britain because they were fighting them in the war, right? So Germany ends up sinking two American vessels off the coast of Britain, really ticking off the Americans, but still they're like, we're going to hang back, right? This isn't our war. We don't need to get involved. But then the sinking of the Lusitania happens, all right? It's a ship that was owned by the British. A U-boat sinks the Lusitania, killing over 1,000 people, including 128 Americans. So at this point, Americans are like, no, we're not doing this anymore. And the president warned Germany that diplomacy between those two countries was going to become very frayed, all right, or they were going to cut ties completely with them. Then comes this thing called the Zimmermann telegram. Basically, a telegram is intercepted by British military intelligence, and Germany had been corresponding with Mexico back and forth. A few decades prior, the United States had gained territory that once belonged to Mexico, and Germany was sending telegrams to Mexico saying, hey, help us in the war, and then if we win, we'll give you back the land that America took from you. And obviously that did not go well or go over well. So the U.S. officially enters the war in 1917, April 6th to be exact. They eventually send about 2 million troops, with an M, million, to Europe. It really boosted the morale of the Allied forces and kind of showed the Central Powers that this war really wasn't going to go well. So Woodrow Wilson didn't really want to go to war, but thought that victory in World War I would mean a long-lasting peace on the entire world. And as we know, it didn't really work out that well, but that was his hope. So the end comes in November 11th, 1918. Germany finally asked for an armistice. With this new influx of Allied troops in the form of the United States, they just really can't fight this war because Germany was the big central power that was still at it at this point in 1918. So they surrender, signals the end. The Allies win. Know that for your test. After Germany basically surrenders, they go to a peace conference in Paris. All right, the Allied leaders met in France, and in retrospect, this really didn't go over well because one thing, usually when you're at a peace conference or signing a treaty with other countries, you go to a neutral site. This was not a neutral site. This was in France. They were an Allied country. Also, they didn't even invite Russia, or now called the USSR. They didn't invite them, and they didn't invite Germany. So how are you not going to invite some people that were involved in the war, right? In retrospect, not super good. So although there were 39 nations at the conference, there's going to be something called the Big Three come up. And the Big Three are the U.S., Britain, and France. And essentially they're going to control a lot of the peace conference and a lot of the treaty that's going to come out of the end of this war. The Big Three, and sometimes Italy is included in this and called the Big Four, but for our purposes, we're just going to call it the Big Three. The Big Three: Britain, France, America. So the U.S. had President Woodrow Wilson. He wanted peace, and his big thing was we need a long-lasting peace. We're done with this. We're done with imperialism. We're done with nationalism. He came up with a plan called the 14 Points, that he was like, if we follow these 14 points, there will be peace on earth. It doesn't really work out, and not a lot of the Allied powers support it. He did suggest one thing that they tried that later failed, and it was called the League of Nations, kind of the precursor to the United Nations, where groups of countries come together to negotiate rather than go into full-scale war. The other part of the big three was France. Prime Minister George Clemenceau. All right, he was nicknamed the Tiger. He was a very fierce politician. All right, so he was the opposite of Wilson, because he was like, look, y'all might be wanting world peace here and wanting everybody to be equal, but you didn't get invaded by Germany for multiple years and have your cities destroyed. So he wanted to crush the Germans, didn't want them ever to be able to invade France ever again. Then on the other part of the big three, Great Britain. So Prime Minister William Lloyd George, he was kind of in the middle. All right, he saw sides of Wilson's plans and Clemenceau's plans, and he wanted to kind of ride the fence. All right, he didn't want to completely destroy Germany and their economy, but he did think they needed to pay some sort of price. So the Treaty of Versailles is signed in 1919. The Allies and Germany sign it together. So it punished Germany harshly, and this is going to come back to bite pretty much the rest of the world later, because they lost a lot of territory, severe restrictions to their really big military. They had to sign a clause called the War Guilt Clause that basically said, hey, our bad for starting World War I, and they had to pay reparations, so give money to the countries that they destroyed through their military actions, bombing their cities and stuff like that. Other treaties that are going to happen are going to cause a big shakeup in the world map of Europe. So if you look here, a lot of change happens pre-war and after the war. So Austria-Hungary is broken up into two countries. New countries are created: Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Romania, Poland, Estonia, Latvia, all these different countries. The Ottoman Empire is going to shrink even more and eventually disappear. And then former colonies of the Germans and the Ottomans are going to go under the control of Wilson's League of Nations, and then before it collapses, and then they're either going to become part of the League of Nations, or Britain or France are just going to take them. So a lot of shakeup on the world map, as you can see, after World War I. Another big thing was just the amount of people that died, the amount of destruction that comes along with a world war on every continent. So about 9 million people are going to die, 16 million were wounded, 6 to 13 million estimated, because there aren't, records of that, but it's estimated that that many people died, and many others became refugees, the civilians, people not even, fighting in a military capacity. Buildings all over Europe are destroyed, people face huge war debts and the cost of reconstruction. So another aftermath was the governments of Russia, Germany, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire. There's going to be a lot of turmoil, a lot of turnover. We're going to see things like revolts, the rise of socialism, communism. We're later going to talk about something called fascism, even though it's misspelled here. Colonial troops around the world are going to wish for independence and hope that their countries can become independent from these European nations. China and Japan are going to want more lands and there's going to be friction between them because they want more land in the Pacific, or in the case of Japan, they want land that was claimed by China that they said that they deserved after World War I due to different treaties that were signed. In Africa, the big three, like I said earlier, are going to take Germany's colonies in Africa, further shaking up the map of Africa. So the major consequences, and you definitely need to know these for your test, many countries were not happy with the Treaty of Versailles. All right, the League of Nations, one of Wilson's plans for world peace, gets created. About 40 countries join, but the U.S. actually drops out of it. So the people that thought of it actually leave it, and eventually it breaks up and doesn't have a lot of power. Germany is going to be very bitter about how they're treated after the war, and it's later going to help fuel the fire for people like Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. Political landscape of Europe is very complicated. We're going to have revolts, independence movements, the rise of communist and socialist ideas all over the world. All right. So World War I was at one time called the war to end all wars, and it really was not. There's going to be more war after that. So where we're going with this is in the next unit, we're going to get into the rise of dictators and origins of World War II. So do me a favor and be working on your Unit 9 study guide, working on any review materials you may find in Google Classroom to get ready for the end of our World War I unit. I appreciate your all's hard work. Have a great day.